This is GST 7130, Module 9, Components, Frameworks, Dashboards, and Platforms. I'm your instructor, Robert Hewlett, and you can contact me via the email address below. So the learning outcomes for today's lecture, although not an absolute list, would be, by the end, we should be able to distinguish between reactive and responsive, compare DOM, VDOM, and SDOM, V being virtual DOM, S being shadow DOM, DOM being DOM, the actual real DOM. Describe various data vises. Now this is a term you got to get used to. It's for visualization, but it seems to be a buzzword. So if you see people going around the office talking about viz this, viz that, they probably mean visualization. We'll distinguish between web components and frameworks. Web components is a term that was safe, could mean something different in the future, and that. So, but we'll talk about that soon. We'll describe a mashup, a hackathon, and a hackfest. Describe a dashboard. Distinguish between static and dynamic dashboards. Describe visualization platforms. This week we'll just kind of introduce some, and next week we might dig in a little deeper. So right now I just want to review sharing levels. So we talked about these a couple weeks ago. And so there was ad hoc, standalone computer, not doing much. Connected, maybe you have a network share, two computers are sharing, starting to share some data. Functional is maybe we move right to a proper client-server system where you have something like QGIS talking to Postgres. And so there is a dedicated machine that acts as a server that is a, I would say, classic client server. It's some type of database communicating on some port. Is it 1521 being Oracle? Is it 5432 being Postgres? 3306 is Microsoft SQL. No, that'd be MySQL. So there's something like that running, and you would hope that that database had some enterprise level features and stuff. We have domain, where we have more of a distributed system. There might be several databases involved that you're talking to. And it's these next levels, enterprise, where we jump into web services and infrastructure, right, which is even a bigger concept of integrating web services, is where you can really start to see mashups and hackfest and hackathons sort of proliferate at this level, because the data is in a form that's easily digestible by your browser, i.e. REST JSON services. So they spit out JSON, which means the browser can kind of get it and twist it and shape it into the form that it needs. In that, really hard for the browser to get to some disconnected standalone desktop where the data is. You need the data to be available. A lot of browsers don't have the Oracle client built into it, don't have the Postgres client built into it. In that. So it's these levels here where we get web services that act as what we call that middleware that takes that very specific binary format but actually flips it into some type of text. We're going to find out in one of the demos that we take the binary, flip it into text, and put it back into binary to make it small. So it's kind of interesting. That. So we're going to try to distinguish between reactive and responsive. Reactive is a JavaScript thing, right? So if I had to put some boundaries down, and these boundaries are going to be fuzzy, okay? So in that, but reactive is really about some JavaScript running. In that, you have the HTML that you defined in the file, and then you have it gets loaded into the browser. And so there's and we call that the DOM, document object model. And so although HTML is a file, that's really not what you are interacting with once it's in the browser. The browser reads that file and converts it to this in-memory structure. And so when you have an app, and this concept happens on Android and a lot of places, JavaFX. I think on Android they call it Inflator. So they have a big XML file that describes like where your buttons are and your drop-down lists and all that sort of thing. And it's stored on this in this file on disk, much like HTML is a file on disk. But they have this process where they read the file in and what they call inflate the interfaces. They have lots of funny names on Android in that. But basically, once that occurs, you're not dealing with the file anymore. It gets read in, and then it uses the information in that file to construct the interface in memory. And then you, as a programmer, are working with this in-memory version of what used to be in the file, right? And that's what the DOM does. So the DOM, the window.document, and the window, what is the window? Is it the whole browser? No, it'd be like today it would be like one of the tabs in the browser. So you have a tab in the browser, and it's not even the top part where you have the fave icon and all that. It's really the little rectangular part below on the tab that we're dealing with, is all those things that are in memory that were constructed based on what the browser saw in the HTML file. Okay. And so there are different techniques for frameworks, and we'll talk about those. But if you're going to work with the DOM in changing things, so one technique is called shadow DOM, that as these elements get created, they kind of get tagged with, hey, these are one of the things that can change, right? And so you know ahead of time as you're loading, hey, it looks like this part of the interface isn't fixed, it's changeable. And so it keeps it like a list of all the nodes in the DOM. And that's what the DOM is, big bunch of nodes, like a big tree you got to scan to find out which parts do we change, which parts do we not. The shadow DOM kind of just does it up front, right? I am a pay early over a pay late thing in that. So the shadow DOM pays early, tracks things. Okay, this part changes. So when changes have to be made, it kind of knows what part of the tree, the DOM noded tree, it needs to go to and change something on. Or that's the concept, right? Virtual DOM makes a whole copy of the DOM. You get the one that's in the browser. They kind of have another one off to the side. And so a framework, which is what we'll talk about later, is actively hammering on changing the virtual DOM, real fast. And then it compares its DOM to the one that's in the window and says, okay, I compared the two trees. This is where we got to go to make changes. Maybe it's like a pay late thing, and that. Now, responsive, right, is a cascading style sheet thing. Now, in all honesty, you can't do a lot of responsive stuff. Move the page around, but that's somewhere deep in the background. There being a little bit of JavaScript that does that, but that's okay, right? So, but it's really about when we define these things. Where do we define it, or where is it happening? We usually define the responsive part using cascading style sheets, and so and a lot of it gets into turning displays off and on, changing the layout of controls. Are they inline? Are they block? Are they block inline? Are they flex? And based on those settings and changing those settings, we can start moving chunks around. I did mention in previous lectures, fundamentally your HTML has to be structured in chunks, right? So that you can identify, okay, it's this particular part that needs to go to the left or go to the right, or its display be turned off, like a menu that slides out from the left. It's honestly always there. It's just that we turn it off and on, and we add a little animation so that it looks like it's sliding out from the left. All this trickeration, as they say. But basically, responsive design is really about a cascading style sheet. Now, cascading style sheets do get into styles, but if we're talking about the responsive part, we're talking about positioning and reorganizing the interface. So when you flip from portrait to landscape on your phone, or you go from a big screen to a small screen, and instead of having the table and the map side by side, maybe we put the map above and the table below, right? So that ability to, switch positions. So I see it when we're talking responsive, we're really talking about positioning and reorganizing the interface. And whereas reactive is changing what's inside that particular portion of the page. So if like zooming the map to a different location, that's reactive, right? Having the map above the table above the map, or the table to the left or to the right, that sort of thing, or the table slides out, or looks like it slides out from the slides up from the bottom, let's say. That's more about responsive, changing what's in that table, changing the map in terms of turning layers on and off or zooming the map around. That's reactive, right? We're reacting to the user doing something. Responsive is just about, hey, is that on the left or right? Does that slide out? Do we see that right now? Does that go away? Kind of stuff. So that's what responsive is dealing with. You'll be in lots of conversations where people are crossing over terms. A great way is just to, in your head, do auto substitution. Don't have to have the big techno weenie debate with them and that kind of stuff. But as long as it's clear in your head, because if it's a reactive thing, we're going to focus on the JavaScript part, and if it's a responsive thing, we're going to focus on cascading style sheets and that. And like I said, responsive is trying to deal with screen size, right? So that our app looks okay on the desktop and looks really, really good on mobile. That would be the trend today, mobile first development, right? But that's the idea. And so there's been lots of, lots of attempts at this, every 3 to 5 years, there's a new way to try to do it and that, which is okay, right? But that's pretty classic about what happens. And again, even though Cascading Style Sheet does do all the styles and colors and stuff, when we're talking about responsive, we're talking like Flexbox and grids and our scroll bars turned on and off, because that can, a scroll bar in a limited area gives you, more virtual real estate because people can scroll up or scroll to the side, right? And so you're expanding the size of that control by letting people scroll on it. And so that kind of makes sense on the desktop. It can be tough to effectively do a scroll where other parts of the app don't think you're swiping on them when you're on mobile. So we'll talk a little bit about the data viz, right? The new term, buzzword in that. So best viz for a data set. So what is the best viz for a data set? And I'm going to say it depends, because you should, as a GS person, we have a message that we're trying to get across, or we're trying to organize the data in a way so that people can make, it's clear what decision has to be made and that kind of stuff. Or it's, we don't want to force the decision making, but we want to present the data in a way so that it's easier for someone to say, okay, yeah, this is the way we got to go in that. And so is that as a map, right? Maybe it's a table or a list. Sometimes, look, we've done these. I remember doing really crazy analysis, forest vegetation breakdowns and all that kind of stuff. And in the end, the person had to make I need to know the total number of hectares, and then I can make a decision, right? So they just needed like, one column, one row with a value in it, and they would know what to do. And so sometimes a table is okay, and sometimes the list is okay. And interesting thing, how are they different? A list is like one column. Actually, what you see on mobile devices, there was an era where everything was a list. I mean, everything you were scrolling on lists. That's how you got things done. But the list item actually would try to pack more stuff into it. So basically, you're trying to, in one column, right, in one cell, expand the cell, and, instead of stretching the data out horizontally, because you couldn't because you're on a phone, you'd stretch out the data for a particular row vertically in that. Next time you're in checking your mail or something, or scrolling through a list of mail, look at all the stuff they pack in there. There's a little avatar sometimes of a person who's emailing you. There might be the subject title of the email. There might be the first few words. There might even be a timestamp. And there might even be some stuff about whether you want to, mark it as a high priority email and stuff like that. So, that stuff we used to traditionally stretch out horizontally into different columns, and now we stack it vertically. And the reason we did that is because people scrolling through their phone is just a normal thing. And so we have unlimited vertical space, but we have very limited horizontal space in that. But yeah, like that was a little bit of a tangent. But what is the best way to show this data, right? In that, maybe it's a chart. And even in charts, it's which chart would be best for this data? Is this, okay, it is a chart, but should it be a pie chart, polar chart, bar chart, area chart, right? What really goes, okay, yeah, I know what's going on. I can really see the difference there. right? Sometimes it's a gauge. So a gauge is just usually looking at one value in that. But it's like a gas gauge. Like you, besides the value, you're also looking at a min and a max and knowing where you are visually between those two. That's meant to mean something, right? So in that, so there is this thing of you know, if we thought not all gauges have to be in percent, but if we thought of it as percent, right? Like where are we? 90% could be good or bad depending, right? Um, uh, in that indicators are usually like there's just a number on the screen. And that's not always have to be a number. It could be a count, an average. But that's where you see it used a lot. Could be some text. But things we do with indicators is, we can change the styling so that, they light up when we're in danger, or, we could change like a simple thing. There could be an indicator, what they call key performance indicator. We'll talk about that, KPIs. We could change the color that once it crosses a certain threshold. And there's like little things like up arrow, down arrows. That's the number, but are we going up or are we going down, like a stock price or something like that? And then, or something more of an infographic where you're taking lots of data sets and summarizing them in some big numbers, like someone to get a feel for like how big a certain market is. I just need to know these key numbers, and I'll have a good feel for what's going on in that. But an infographic is usually one, it might be static. There's no map. It's just a bunch of key numbers. We have 1,000 of this. We sell hundreds of these and stuff. And so it's all these different, raw numbers that the person who's looking at it totally gets what's going on. And of course, there's this concept of a dashboard, which could combine a lot of the above, like an ESRI dashboard third generation. We can have maps with tables linked to charts and gauges and indicators in that. We typically don't do an infographic on a dashboard, but the infographic definitely combines the first 4 or 5 there, right? Map, tables, charts, gauges, even lists. You can see lists on ESRI dashboards and that. So it usually combines above, and then we'll get into the issue about static and dynamic in future slides. So what we're going to do in this next series of slides is we want to go from HTML to components to frameworks and try to get a feel for like how they're different, how they dovetail, are they really mutually exclusive, and that.